As the Bills prepare for the Denver Broncos in Mile High Stadium, there has been some grave injury news out of Western New York. First of all, we're seeing not only did Gabe Davis, after that awful hit, we talked about it briefly on our own show at the Bills Roundtable, he took that nasty hit from what, in my opinion, Jacksonville playing a fairly dirty game. It's very questionable the way that they were targeting different players. That's for a different discussion. But Gabe Davis has officially been on the IR. That one's known. The breaking news that Terrell Shavers as well went into the game, into the second half with a torn ACL, pile driving other players down the field late in the game for first downs. Just a special teams demon. He is also out with an ACL. I have to imagine that was partially torn, not as bad. Other things, he just was able to complete it. I know people have been able to do that in the past, but it does seem like his hopefully has a good prognosis based on him finishing the game. That could be totally not relevant, but it is another player that is yet out for the Bills. The Joshua Palmer information, he went on IR right before the wild card round. Very interesting situation with Joshua Palmer as well, missing the game. So was that a soft benching and then the injuries happen and they're like, oh man, probably would have wanted Joshua Palmer? Or was there an injury bad enough to keep him out of the playoffs? That is also another topic for a different day, and I'm sure will get addressed in the coming weeks. But the good news, Curtis Samuel, is he a downgrade from those three guys? Honestly, when healthy. We're not talking about, I am his biggest critic because he doesn't play. But when healthy, is he an upgrade to Terrell Shavers? Is he an upgrade to Gabe Davis or Josh Palmer? That remains to be seen. He had his best years ever under Joe Brady in Carolina. Actually, then went out and probably conferred with Brandon Beane and said, let's sign this guy. I know how to use him. We know what happened last year, in and out. Some moments in the playoffs, especially. He actually once again led the Bills in receiving against the Denver Broncos in the wild card round, including a great route to confuse the Denver Broncos and ultimately beat Pat Surtain for a deep touchdown. 66 yards and a touchdown, 3 catches, two total touchdowns, and one in Kansas City. Was top 25 in the playoffs in receiving last year. I think he finished, can't remember if he was 25th or 26th, but right there in total receiving yards in the playoffs last year. So he is a guy that has talent. The Bills schemed up a touchdown against New England to take the lead at home in the third quarter this year as well. So as a receiver 4, I don't believe he's a downgrade. I think the injuries are overblown. I really do. I think they suck to see. Everyone likes Terrell Shavers. I think we're just mix and matching receiver 5s from the Buffalo Bills standpoint, whether it's, you know, a couple of these guys that have been in and out of the lineup, like Elijah Moore, who can't even make it, in my opinion, a pretty bad Denver Broncos receiving core. We'll talk about their team more in depthly here on Thursday on the on the Bills Roundtable, and we'll break that down a little bit more. But it's not a good receiving core. Obviously, like Cortland Sutton a lot, but Elijah Moore can't even make that over a little Jordan Humphrey. You know, there's Marvin Mims there who doesn't play a whole lot. I mean, he gets his snaps, but they kind of mix and match Pat Bryant. So they have, in my opinion, they have Sutton, and then really not that great of receiving core. And Elijah Moore can't even be receiver 6 on the Denver Broncos either. So clearly something's not connecting there post his Cleveland and the Jets days. It's just, it's tough to say what's going on, but well enough to be cut. So that didn't work out. But we're just kind of saying who's the best receiver 5. You know, Mecole Hardman's been in that role. Will he get called up for his punt return duties? Will it be a new guy in Christian Wilkerson, who spent the offseason, who is known to want to be a special teams demon? He's a deep threat. He has a 9 RAS. That's pretty remarkable. He's a guy that, in my opinion, I think he had around 80 to 90 to 100 receiving yards in the preseason. So he's a guy that probably got edged out by Shavers. And that was, you know, talked about as not necessarily on the roster, but definitely a fringe roster guy that was probably super close to being able to make the roster. So that is a pretty cool note to know that, like, he has experience. He could go in this situation. Don't think it would be Stephen Gosnell. Interesting, they did stash him all year and then decided not to play him at all in call-ups with the receivers. So he must just be a pure stash for next season to see if he's able to compete now with Shavers down and Gabe Davis down, if he's able to compete for that receiver 5, receiver 6 potentially next year on the roster. Would have expected maybe he would be a next guy up, but the Bills obviously view Hardman as they should, and possibly even Wilkerson, who wasn't on the roster before yesterday, ahead of him. We saw Trent Sherfield actually get signed to New England. I wonder if there was a battle there between Bills and New England. He has really great special teams experience. He has great run blocking experience. Was he somebody that was considered by the Bills? It would be hard pressed for me to not assume that he was at one point considered for the role of taking this receiver 5 spot. But right now it's Hardman versus Wilkerson. Is Hardman redundant with the rest of the roster, with Cooks, with possibly obviously Shakir, with with the ability to call up Samuel? It's going to be redundant with those three probably, unless they do view him as being able to return punts in the playoffs. So that could edge him over. Or is it going to be Wilkerson that takes over the role for receiver 5, which, I mean, by all accounts, it's looking likely that it could be Terrell Shavers that takes that role and is starting for the Bills. How much of a special teams downgrade will he be? Remains to be seen. How much of a run blocking downgrade will he be? Remains to be seen. He has had some receiving chops. I mean, I like what he was able to do in the preseason. So it's something that we're going to have to watch really, really closely as the coming days here and as we can see here. Yeah, just some pretty good information. We have an interview with Ian Mills interviewing Christian Wilkerson. Would he spend time interviewing if he wasn't possible to be called up? I don't think he would have. So as we can see here, I got his RAS up 9.8 RAS. He can vert jump. He can broad jump. He still ran in the 4.4s. 10-yard split 1.55, which is good for getting off the line of scrimmage. He likes running deep routes, but that's a really good looking 6'1", 200-pound guy that can get open down the field. So I think that's something we need to pay attention to, is what Christian Wilkerson is going to be able to do. And to me, guys, we're fighting over the wrong things. Like, Keon Coleman's going to have to step up. Is it a Keon Coleman day? Is Christian Wilkerson, how much of a downgrade is he really at the receiver 5 position? If it is him, how much of a downgrade from Gabe Davis? They're different players. Is Curtis Samuel? He'll be able to do something. I'm assuming that the Bills will have some things in their playbook for Curtis Samuel. It made sense to me last week when Gabe Davis went down, and I was like, I'm thinking he's ready to play based on getting called. They basically did the same thing with Josh Palmer. So the Bills said, we're going to use this roster spot because we're going to roll with Shavers and Gabe for now. But if anything happens, we know we have Samuel in our back pocket, which for all the receiving talk wasn't a bad thing to have in the divisional round of the playoffs, to be able to, we have a guy that has been hurt, but is receiver 3 in this league. And, we can even downgrade him to a receiver 4 in this league, because you have Cooks, who came out pretty much proven to be a receiver 2 down the stretch. He really has been. He has been what you're looking for. You have Khalil Shakir, who by all advanced metrics, that's the biggest thing people forget. I guess we consider him like a short receiving back. Essentially, he was playing in the backfield at times in really interesting 2 personnel looks. But ultimately, was he somebody that is more than a receiver 3? He has high-end receiver 2 metrics, almost receiver 1. So like Amon-Ra St. Brown in a way where just because of where he plays doesn't mean he's not a high-end receiver. So we got to kind of stop with the Bills not having receivers. He's a yak and rat king, one of the best in the NFL's at it. So we got to stop considering him like a good receiver 3. He's every bit as much as per EPA per play. He's every bit as much of a receiver 2 to high-end receiver 2, low-end receiver 1 as in the NFL. So I think that needs to be pretty much stressed. And another point that I think is super interesting, that, I'm the data guy. I like to bring up data and different metrics. But one thing that I thought was really pivotal in this discussion was the stats from the players missing the game. And as we can see here, all 3 of those receivers that we just talked about, Palmer, we talked about Shavers and Davis, 49 catches for 677 yards. I mean, you're missing 1 out of 3 roster spots combined. And some of that is in week 18 against the Jets. You're not missing a ton of production. More importantly, 19 catches over the since week 12 and only 28 yards last week. So it isn't like the Bills are missing like a true receiver 2 and a true receiver 3, kind of like we're acting. It's basically the compilation of like one player, receiver 3, receiver 4 type of player in this offense. So that is something that I think is super important and nuanced to discuss about it. And then, a lot of people are like, the blocking. Well, per the metrics that I've pulled, the blocking's pretty similar. Josh Palmer may have gotten benched because of how poor he is at blocking, in my opinion. So I think that's what happened there. And with the injury, especially, the Bills were like, we're going to roll with some guys that do other things. Didn't take too kindly of that. And whether he's injured or not, I guess we're going to have to see in the coming weeks. But besides Palmer, I mean, you have Cooks, who's a willing blocker at times. In my opinion, Keon Coleman has put on really good run blocking film if he stays consistent, and it's just as good as anybody on this team. Obviously, Shakir is used to being in different settings and getting the ball and being a decoy and doing a lot of different things. I have no problems with him. So, like, it's kind of not a huge loss, in my opinion, for what this offensive roster can do. I think everyone can block on the roster. That's a good thing. The tight ends, the 3 tight ends, they have, a fourth and a tight end fullback and Reggie Gilliam. They have multiple blocking options. And one of the biggest things I'm always told is we don't need any more blocking receivers until, like, you want to use that as a way to discuss, like, we're missing players now, we're missing blocking receivers. So we kind of can't have it both ways when it comes to this receiver room, because to me, the one benefit to how this receiver room is built, we talk all the time about the negatives. One of the benefits to this receiver room is it doesn't, like, you're swapping in similar players. Like, to sit here and say that Shavers and Gabe Davis are a downgrade to Curtis Samuel, who's seemingly pretty healthy, who's had rested body, unfortunately, unlike the rest of the roster, and possibly even Wilkerson or Hardman, I just think that's disingenuous. I just think that there's probably some areas where there's some downgrades. Chris Tabor is going to have to tell us potentially in special teams, but he handpicked a bunch of players for this roster. He handpicked Andre Jones, Balin Spector, Damar Hamlin coming off IR can take away Terrell Shavers' role in some facets. So it's not, the special teams doesn't have to come from receiver. That's the beauty of special teams. It can come from anywhere. And ultimately, when you put it all together, you're getting healthier. Does Ed Oliver play? I like this roster just as good or better than the wild card round. Ultimately, I think that there's some players getting healthier. Does Terrell Bernard come back and play even in a reserve role so that we don't have to see Balin Spector in the game? So there's definitely, and not even mentioning if Ed Oliver's activated, what he's able to do to this defensive roster, even in 30% of the snaps on third downs or whatever that the Bills may have planned for him. So I think that there's a lot of benefit here. And that's not even to mention if they can get through this round. Do we see Maxwell Harrison? Do we see Ty Johnson? Do we see ultimately probably the healthiest version of the roster we've seen in a while, minus the 3 receivers that the Bills just interchange anyways, and are just going to have to go with the same 5 going forward for however long, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, however long they play. They may have their handpicked 5, and that's not obviously including Knox and Kincaid, who did enough, but they weren't a huge part of the game plan, which they could be here. So the Broncos struggle against 12 personnel, and in my opinion, the Bills can run an efficient throw out of it efficiently with 2 of the better tight ends in the NFL, especially as a combination. And that's not including Hawes and Reggie Gilliam, who also add another dynamic. And, what they're getting from, obviously James Cook, the number 1 rushing team in the NFL with the number 1 offensive line, O-line per many advanced metrics, run block win rate, pass block win rate. I mean, they're top of the league in every facet. And the tight end room's great. So in my opinion, stressing about receiver 5 and stressing about receiver 4 and 5 all year was a weird one. Getting Cooks was a huge benefit. Maybe it was lucky. Maybe he's playing for a final couple of years. He's only 31, so maybe he's playing for another 2-year deal to close his career. Maybe it's back here in Buffalo with the Bills really only having Shakir on the roster. Will Cooks come back? But Keon Coleman time. Is he the merchant we've been looking for? He made a play last week. I think it's time. He's going to be playing a full complement of snaps between him and obviously Shakir. And Cooks. I think that's your trio. I think you get Samuel in for some plays where rest is needed, Wilkerson blocking in special teams only, or Hardman punt return in certain deep plays only. So either whatever way they decide to go here with the receiver 5, either or. I ultimately think that it's those 3. It's Cooks, it's Keon Coleman, and Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir. I mean, I don't hate that 4 group of receivers. I think that it's better than 2023. I mean, we're not going to sit here and say a team that had Trent Sherfield, who wasn't employed until yesterday, and now he's on the practice squad of the New England Patriots, and Deontay Hardy, who's not employed, where the receivers 2 and 3 in the playoffs 2 years ago. I like what I have from this unit more than that unit. It is what it is. And then you even had Diggs on that unit, so you could say, well, you had Diggs. Well, Shakir's production's been just as good as Diggs, and Diggs had a huge drop in that game, as well as Sherfield and Hardy just didn't do anything. So I ultimately like what they're able to do, and I expect a game from Keon Coleman. I think this is where he's showing that if it isn't in Buffalo, he can still put on film, and he can still play really well and be worth an asset if the Bills decide to trade him, maybe even as high as a day 2 asset if he shows out in these NFL playoffs. So I think the Bills have a lot on the line to prove. Let's give him 40 to 50 snaps, and let's prove what he can do here. If you're the Bills and what you're able to develop from Keon Coleman. I don't think it's quite done quite yet. I'm going to say the injuries are overblown at this point until there's a little more, something else happens in the divisional round. Right now, I'm not overly concerned with losing 19 catches for 221 yards since week 12. It's just not going to be something that moves me enough to be ultimately overly upset. And as we saw, Terrell Shavers is officially put on IR. And to kind of wrap the point up, only 20 of the Bills' 190 points missed due to injury persists came on the offensive side of the ball, which is second fewest. So I think as much as the Bills, are reeling at certain positions, honestly, offensively, it hasn't, to my data, it hasn't cost them on the offensive side of the ball. It hasn't. That has not been an offensive problem. So there's no reason to make an offensive problem when Gabe Davis, who I love Gabe Davis, one of my favorite Bills in recent history. I think he's way underrated. He wasn't the same player. He's a great blocker. He's developed a really good presence for the ball, but I just don't think he's the same player. And he's getting benched down the stretch. He's getting benched. So I think that's something to always remember going forward, that Cooks was getting the ball, even Hardman at times, like getting active, and I'm not going to sit here with the data. The injury data persists, pointing to only 20 of the Bills' points lost. And the Bills are number 2 in the league in total man games missed, but only 20 on the points affected on the offensive side of the ball, which is the second fewest in the NFL. So I think that's something that we have to remember as we evaluate this Denver Broncos game, that I think it's a little bit overblown right now of what Terrell Shavers, who has a great story, who earned his roster spot, especially on teams. I think Chris Tabor has done a wonderful job in this playoffs being handled what he's been dealt. And I think he'll figure it out with now getting Damar Hamlin back at the safety position to play specifically special teams. I'm not overly concerned. And then Gabe Davis, who basically earned this. I'm sorry, guys. He beat out Josh Palmer at the end, like literally in half 2 against the Jets on week 18. We don't overly know. He probably was going to play in the playoff. We don't overly know where they would have gone with that and how well Palmer even took that news leading to the IR, which was really strange to me overall as you break down the roster, and what they were probably not going to give him a jersey. And they're like, fine, sit me down, and, some compilation of all that. But we're going to talk about this game and more, and the overblown injuries right on the Bills Roundtable with Z-Bot, with myself, with Dan Mitchell. We're going to have a lot to break down. So I want you guys to catch that. But I think that as of right now, the injuries are overblown, and there's reasons to be optimistic about not only Curtis Samuel and maybe Christian Wilkerson, but is this going to be Keon Coleman's calling and proving that he is a top second-round pick of the Buffalo Bills?